Welcome to the Anxious Child Podcast, the podcast that helps you best work with anxious kids and teens. Now, here's your host, Stephen Quinlan.
Hey everyone, today on the show we have an old colleague and friend of mine, Peter Sultan. Peter and I started working together after graduate school in New York City in East Harlem. In our conversation today, we cover some of that early experience and what that was like for us and how it may or may not have contributed to some burnout or compassion fatigue from the extreme conditions that we were under. Peter also chronicles his journey working at one of the nation's top hospitals with AIDS patients and what he calls cycles of compassion fatigue. We then moved to what ultimately helped Peter move past this compassion fatigue, which was narrative medicine, which is a really interesting field which I was unfamiliar with. Ultimately, much of what seems to be curative about narrative medicine is fostering that sense of connection to other people and the work that you're doing. Much of this also applies to parents taking care of kids who have special needs or mental health diagnoses. I really love this conversation, and I feel like we touched on some really profound and central points around not only managing burnout and compassion fatigue, but also just what it means to be somebody in the helping profession and even a human being in general. Peter has always been adept at being able to conceptualize and elucidate profound existential issues, and this conversation is certainly no exception. I really loved having him on the show and reconnecting, and I think that there is a ton of great takeaways here. So let's check in really quick with our two sponsors, and we'll get right to it. If you're having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, one of the best things you can possibly do is start getting enough magnesium. But please don't run to the store to buy the first magnesium supplement you find. Most magnesium supplements use only the two cheapest synthetic forms. And since they're not full spectrum, they won't fix your magnesium deficiency or help you sleep better. There are actually 7 unique forms of magnesium, and you must get all of them if you want to experience its calming, sleep-enhancing effects. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers. Simply take 2 tablets before you go to bed, and you'll be amazed by how much better you sleep and how much more rested you feel when you wake up. For an exclusive offer for my listeners, go to magbreakthrough.com/anxiety and use the code anxiety10 during checkout to save 10%. What is that mess of cords doing in the corner, and how is it affecting your overall mental state? Our friends at Mount Genie at mountgenie.com have the answer for you. If you're tired of looking at your messy area and feeling stressed out by having cables everywhere and all over the place, they can help you out. Mount Genie makes clever tech accessories that rein in that messy cord clutter for all kinds of devices. You can use them for your Alexa, your Google Home. You can use them for Wi-Fi routers. They also have solutions for your keys, your sunglasses. I have a little mount that goes right next to my outlet for the control for my air conditioner, and it just holds that control, which I probably would have lost at least 100 times, right there next to it. So every time I go and look for it, it's right there. Check them out for the special offer that they're offering right now for my listeners. Simply enter the code anxiety10 at mountgenie.com and save 10%. Check them out today, mountgenie.com. All right, one other quick note before we start the interview. You'll hear both Peter and I reference JWJ often throughout, and that is the James Weldon Johnson Counseling Center where we used to work in New York. So if you hear that, just know that that's what the reference is there. Okay, so let's get to it. We're kicking it old school here today on the podcast, taking it all the way back to the beginning, more than 20 years ago. And here's me and Peter Sultan.
How the heck are you?
Good, man. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. You might see my better half.
I see your lovely wife walking around in the background there. Yep.
Did you ever meet Dalit? I think you did, didn't you?
You know, one time, I remember being at your guys' place. God, I can't even remember where it was. I'm assuming it was in the city somewhere.
No, we lived in, I think we lived in Riverdale when I worked at JWJ.
Really? Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, your guess is probably better than mine.
I know.
But I remember being over there with my girlfriend at the time, which tells you how long ago that was.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all I remember. I just remember that we were there. And I remember meeting her and her being very nice.
Yes.
I think that was it. Oh, maybe I was there with like Julie or Nicole or something like that, but I have no idea. So
yeah, different lives, man.
Yeah, man.
So clearly, you've already. I don't know. I mean, we could chew on this for as long as you want, but so your girlfriend did not become your wife.
No, thankfully not.
And that was the girlfriend that you were living with in Yonkers.
No, that was my wife. That was, I guess, the first year that we were married. So I've made a couple of good decisions in my life. That was one of them.
Yeah.
Luckily it's a big one.
Yeah.
You may or may not remember this, but I met my wife through Allison, who used to work at JWJ.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
They were best friends and went to college together. And I had broken up with my girlfriend. And this is total like JWJ lore here.
Yeah.
I remember I was recounting some tale of this crazy date that I went on. I think it was in Hoboken, New Jersey or something. And Allison happened to be at lunch that day. And she was like, "Oh, you broke up with your girlfriend." And I was like, "Oh yeah, whatever." And so she went and told Kim, who's now my wife, this guy, I think that you would really like him.
He's on the market.
He's on the market now.
Right.
And so that was that. And that was in 5 days, it will be our 17th wedding anniversary. So there you go.
Holy wow.
Yeah. How about that?
That's a major accomplishment.
Yeah.
That's a major accomplishment. Wow. You've been married almost as long as I have.
Is that right?
Well, I've known Dalit since 1998. We started dating in 98 and we got married in 2000. So we're coming up on our 21st anniversary.
Yeah. Holy
So we're only 4 years behind. So
yeah. That sounds right.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah. I know. It's a trip.
I mean, I'd love to hear about just sort of where you went from back at our salad days of yore when we were at Johnson Counseling Center.
Yeah,
and
that's a very liberal treatment of our day, of our salad, of our days.
Yes,
I should let you speak. You are the host of the show.
No, it's okay. That was a generous term, but it's funny because we were talking a little while ago about just what that was like being in the housing projects and doing therapy there with all the kids, and just what the environment was like for the kids and the people that we're trying to help, but also just for ourselves as clinicians. I know you have your own kind of story about, I don't know if you call it burnout or compassion fatigue or however you want to look at it, but
yeah,
I'd love to hear where you went from there and kind of how that played into it.
Sure. So you're willing to make this a 4-hour podcast, not a
Yes,
1 hour podcast.
We got time, man.
So I think where we worked it felt almost like we didn't have time or the space to burn out. It was such high intensity, and the high intensity was partly the environment that you were talking about. And that environment was, we were embedded in the place that we treated our patients, and that embedding included being exposed to the asbestos that was being scraped out of Lord knows what crevice on the buildings. I don't know if you remember that, but there was like asbestos removal for like 3 years, and Lord hopes that we're okay. But they lived in it, like you. I remember the crack vials and the human excrement. And I think there was even some kind of, found drug use and sex happening in those weird concrete block dungeon hallways.
Yeah.
Of course, this is kind of like pre-hardcore HIPAA. So we're all walking around these places with piles of paper charts, theoretically with all the names turned towards our chests, while we're walking. Yeah. That was our
hoping a
HIPAA.
Piece of paper doesn't blow out somewhere or something. Yeah.
My memory of it and my experiences were, this was me as a new clinician like you, I think.
Yep.
And so it felt like we were really cutting our teeth on something, and it was incredibly real, right? And partly because the beauty of our clinic was that it traversed generations. So you would hear like older clinicians talking about either the kids that they had treated that had grown up, or they knew the families that we were treating now. So there was this tremendous continuity of care, which, is really unheard of, both in mental health and medical care now. And that was so powerful. I'm sure, at least for me, that's partly what kept me there. It felt like you were really part of the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I think it's hard to really contextualize the level of trauma that we were exposed to and the level of trauma that we were treating, right? And that was everything from, I mean, how many ACS case reports, were we making a day?
Yeah, the child
let
services.
alone a week.
Yeah, it was a, it was a common occurrence. Yeah.
Every other moment was like, oh yeah, my mother, made me kneel on the rice, or, oh yeah, I've got these welts from the belt. And that was just the kids' side. I mean, I remember, because I worked in the HIV component for the most part of our clinic, but I also saw patients outside of the HIV clinic. But I remember one patient who was like, yep, I got this knife, and yep, I'm going to stab that guy, and you can't talk me out of it. And at the end of the day, I was lucky enough to be able to actually take the knife away from him. I kind of promised him I would put it in the safe, I kept it for him. And unfortunately, he never came back for it because he died. But
really?
Yeah. So I guess maybe this is my version of the snapshot of, the kind of intensity that we were treating and being in. And I think at some point I just recognized that I can't sustain this. And it wasn't even because I was burnt out. I think I just recognized I just had such a high level of vibration within my body at all times, both mental and physical. I knew I had to make a move towards something. It was just a very kind of instinctual need to get out. And I think also, the level of communication and the kind of communication within these battle lines within our clinic
yes,
was, at best, it was something I could deal with. And at worst, it just added the stress and the level of trauma.
Yeah. I also think there's a component too of, which I think is not to get too off track, but certainly a relevant conversation today as well, as there was, racial and cultural components to that as well. Us being sort of two white guys walking around Spanish Harlem was, it was certainly a new experience for me. I'd never in my life felt like I was the minority, but you are put in this sort of state of awareness of that. And I guess what made me think of that is just, I think it speaks to what you were saying about that heightened level of vibration and awareness and just kind of going all the time and doing what you feel like you have to do because that's your job.
Yeah. And maybe the more accurate kind of version of my experience is heightened vigilance. And that is part of trauma, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
and anxiety as well, like that, like hypervigilance, like constantly being aware. Yeah.
So, how many times did you and I, escort someone to the emergency room, or how many times did I have to call the police? And it's interesting because I have very specific memories of the police coming and, you would call them. I once had an 11-year-old who was who had a history of like killing her pets or torturing her pets, or, I'm just a very troubled child, an 11-year-old girl. And I remember she just, I don't know, at one session, she just went running out the door. And, and I went to my supervisor, or maybe I didn't. And I just, I had to call the police to go look for her. And I remember the police storming in to the clinic like it was a SWAT, exercise.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. Like lock and load, So those guys talk about heightened vigilance, right?
Yeah, right.
And I remember having to be a therapist in that moment to them, in the sense of like, let's bring it down, let's ratchet it down. We're not talking about, this is not a hunt and kill operation. Right. This is like a hunt and find operation.
Let's all do a quick meditation here.
Right.
With the NYPD.
Right. Well, like with dealing with any trauma, you have to kind of meet them first at their emotional kind of intensity, right, and their level. So, it's kind of like I had to bark a little bit at the sergeant who came running in, with, both guns, drawn. So as an example of the kind of craziness that we were in.
Yeah.
And so then I, and of course I had a better half at the time, and still do, thank God, who was really like, you got to get out of there. So I just started poking around, and like most good things that happen in my life, it seemed to come out of some form of serendipity and intention. And I can't remember how I found the job, but you're a Presbyterian, while Cornell needed a supervisor in their HIV service. And I'd never worked in a hospital before, but it was HIV. And obviously I had 5.5 years of experience at that point. I had 5.5 years of clinical experience. And even though it was a big jump up, managing 8 to 10, clinical social workers versus, my only management training at that point had been managing an intern, a social work intern. I went for it, regardless of whatever my qualms were. And it was a lot of things that it kind of worked out, and it was the right thing. And interestingly enough, the clinic that I landed in also had has a real history of continuity of care with their patients. A lot of the patients that go to, and it's called the Center for Special Studies, Weill Cornell Medical Center, near Presbyterian, have been going there since the beginning. In fact, our medical director likes to say the very first patient he ever treated, he still treats, although that patient actually just passed away. But I mean, that, was spanning over 25 years. So I was really blessed to find a place where that kind of depth of treatment was happening. Your question is making me think about, what are the things that have kept me going, and that have attracted me. And I think that kind of continuity affords a different kind of intimacy with your patients. And that's everything. That's everything.
Yeah.
And that helps prevent burnout too.
I was just thinking that as you were saying that that's really like a preventative factor, is that if you get to develop these relationships and continue in them and hopefully see some of that growth and change, like that's so sustaining compared to what I suppose I think of as being the managed care model, where it's like drive through, get them in, get them out. And I had some of those experiences, community mental health center, and it's just like, you've got a huge caseload, and half of them aren't even really showing up. And it's like,
That's right.
It's too much.
I speaking of origin myths and how I made the transition, I just realized how I made the transition. The fascinating thing about the clinic was that when I was at JWJ, I had patients who went to the clinic. And so part of my job sometimes was either them contacting me or me contacting them. And I would have these conversations with their psychiatrists, with their social workers. And I was always like, wow, these people are like, they have the time, number one, they're in a hospital. They make the time to talk about their patients and coordinate care with me. So that was like, ding. And also they were just like very meaningful conversations. These are people who are clearly putting a lot of thought. Clearly, they worked in an environment which allowed them to invest in their patients. And so literally, that's how I found my job, because I was like, oh, I want to work in a place that gives me and affords me that kind of space to work with my patients.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's how I got the job.
Okay.
And then they advertised for it. And I was like, ding, I just was like, okay, that's the place. And what was so profound about the change from going to JWJ, where, of course, what did we have to do? Schedule like at least 40 patients a week, I think.
Yeah.
Right. To make our quota.
Yeah.
And between you and me and your podcast, I think, how many times did I ever make my quota?
Maybe once. In
5.5 years. I think you were better than me. Somehow I have
no,
or at least I had the perception that you were better than me. So.
I'm glad I presented that perception to you.
Right.
I don't think that's entirely accurate.
Right.
I think that numbers everybody kind of knew were impossible, that they were these things put out by, I guess, management to try to give us something to shoot for, but everybody kind of recognized that it was never really going to happen.
Right.
Was the management like, in thinking about, so when you found this new place and there was that aspect of, okay, I have a little bit more time. I don't have these crazy numbers that I have to reach. I can actually engage with the patients more and try to coordinate care. But you were also in a management role now, like you had gone from supervising a grad student, which I remember doing as well, which is a very different experience than being responsible for a fair amount of other clinicians. Was that something that you felt like started to contribute to you feeling that burnout, like that you had to be in this management role, or were there other factors?
So I think that you're alluding to what I've told you about my eventual other burnout, right? So
yes, I am.
Yes. So kind of jumping forward. That's an interesting question. So to answer your question directly, I don't think that managing people per se, especially at the beginning for me, because it was all new. I mean, these were all new skills. The way that our clinic was set up, again, I really landed in the right place. So for example, even though I was managing people, really the bulk of my job was clinical supervision, not administrative supervision.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just from the get-go, that was huge.
Mm-hmm. So for people who aren't familiar, the difference being that you're providing guidance on how to work with patients rather than saying like, you have to get your paperwork done and make sure that, like, more administrative kind of tasks.
Exactly. Well, first of all, our appointments for the most part were medically driven, right? So people were coming in for their medical appointments or for another kind of medical appointment with someone other than their doctor. And I should just briefly say, this is a true designated aid centers, which is Weill Cornell is one of them, were the template of early true interdisciplinary care, which means that under the same roof, we had doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, nurses, nutritionists, GYN, dentists, and even our own chaplain. We actually had our own dedicated chaplain.
Wow.
Lab techs. So it's this huge team, right? And the idea is, that so someone comes in, it's not just like, so it's one-stop shopping. And one of the things that attracted me about the job too is that I was promised, and I did take advantage of, being able to cherry pick patients that I thought had enough ego strength to be able to do some individual regular psychotherapy. So I did that. Mm-hmm. And I did both, right? So I was kind of toggling between all these things. As I'm describing, I was like, wow, what a great job.
What's the problem here?
Yeah. And there were no requirements for quotas. Right. So I went from like, what are your numbers this week to it's quality. It's just like, what's the quality? Not the quantity. And I thought, oh my God, this is insane. Yeah. So I started off in a very good place. What changed, and I think what ultimately led to at least I like to tell people, or I like to tell myself, I went through at least a cycle and a half of burnout, if not 2 full cycles. What led to the problems were my job started to shift from clinical supervision to more administrative supervision. And that had to do with some structural changes. So for example, there used to be 3 more versions of me in the whole clinic. And we were at 2 sites, right? So we were a very large clinic. And then it became 1 supervisor at each site, right? I got more social workers under my supervision. And then there were some real structural changes within the hospital. And it doesn't matter what they are. It's just that what the changes did was really kind of pushed towards, interestingly enough, a certain kind of accountability within the hospital, which of course is always a good thing. But along with the accountability came a whole lot of bureaucratic checks and balances. And so my job really started to veer, I would say in the last like 5 to 7 years, because I was there for 15 years total, really into a huge amount of, electronic and all kinds of bureaucratic kind of mechanisms, which unfortunately really the HIV service was very proud for many years, and I think still is, to be a bit of a rebel rouser in terms of, not being part of that dynamic. Because we were, it's, Presbyterian, Weill Cornell, 5th ranked hospital in the country. As the HIV service, we were probably one of the best, probably still are, one of the best overall HIV clinics in the world. There was a certain, kind of identity, much as we had perhaps a bit of a unique identity at JWJ, that we could do things a little bit differently, that we could work a little bit outside of the system, or at least, as much as one legally can. But we weren't really able to escape that. And when I left, there were certainly, and there still is, a lot of continuing dialogue about how do you, as a cultural, as an institution, how do you adopt and kind of defend your culture against a larger encroaching culture, which I think we were talking about before a little bit, just in terms of being HMO driven and so forth.
Yeah. It makes me think a little bit of like Karl Marx and the sort of idea of alienation, and that people become alienated from their work when they feel like they're just producing these, I think the term he used was widgets. They're just like these things that you're completely disassociated from, and you're just kind of cranking them out. Like back to our experience where it's like, what are your numbers? Okay. Oh, what are you? Oh, I'm a 27. I think Steven might be like a 32 or something,
Right.
And then that,
good week, Steven. See, I told you I wasn't making it up.
Well, I just made that up, but like that's so, it's so alienating and so sort of disenfranchising, that that's what you are. And it's maybe the byproduct of bureaucracy kind of moving in, is that you get separated a bit from that sense of, oh, we are the number 5, hospital in the country, or this is how we do things.
Right.
And I think it's, for people just in general, if you don't have that connection to what it is you're doing or who it is that you're trying to help.
Yes.
That's a real, harbinger of some of those feelings of being cut off and being burnout.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing up Marx, because I had a research. Maybe this is a good segue to talk about one of the things that I found to prevent myself or to rescue myself out of burnout, which is the master's program, which I guess I'll trip on about if you want me to. But
go for it. Yeah,
I had a Latino Marxian research professor.
I can already tell this is something that would like maybe only happen in New York
or at Columbia University,
right? Or Columbia.
Right. Exactly. So fast forward to, I think like 2017, I found myself again on the rocks in terms of like, wow, this is not working out. I'm feeling exhausted. I should probably say, not with too much pride, but just kind of like, to be transparent, is the people that I supervise. I really, took a lot of pride in I still do, and having, real connections with the people that I supervise. And I found that harder and harder to maintain. And I think that was partly a function of, the kind of dynamics I was swimming in, because the people now who are supervising me or who were working around me in terms of senior administration needed to really toe a fine line between making sure that the larger hospital institutions' needs were met and that we were meeting those needs. And that's a really tough dynamic to straddle. Yeah. And I think my relationship with my senior colleagues suffered as a result of that. And of course, the trickle-down effect is that I think it impacted my relationship with my supervisees. And I had experiences where, I had people taking me to HR, and all kinds of things. Just for the record, I've been cleared of all wrongdoing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, but like how difficult that is for you when you, as you said, you pride yourself for being able to form those connections. Yeah. And certainly from what I remember of you and just knowing you, that's something that you do really well, is you connect with people.
Yeah.
And to feel like you're not doing that, I think it just adds to that, sense of,
especially being social work trained and, right.
Right. Yeah.
What comes first in social work, the training or the personality that attracts one to social work. And, like for most of us, it's a combination of both. But,
yeah,
I think one description of burnout is death by 1,000 cuts. And the cuts don't have to be large, but they're small and they're many, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I started to recognize that was happening to me at the hospital. I'm having trouble remembering my origin myths, but there was a doctor in my clinic. There is a doctor in my clinic who's written a book. He was a graduate of this program that, I was like, what's that? And it's called Narrative Medicine. It's at Columbia University, but it was started by an internist, a doctor named Rita Sharon at Columbia New York Presbyterian. Back then, it was called just Columbia Presbyterian. And it was really an attempt by her to find a way to deal with everything that we're talking about, but just the doctor version of it.
Okay.
And she was an English major in college and quite a good writer, I think. Well, I don't know how good a writer she was back then. She's an amazing writer now. And so this program took, I think it started with her. They got a philosopher, they got a writer, and I think they got one other doctor. And then they would invite all these different artists. And it really became this beautiful program, really a practice and a study of radical listening and paying attention using the arts, right? Using, it could be painting, it could be poems, poetry, it could be short prose or longer prose, it could even be music, it could be dance, and using all those elements of the humanities to really forge a way to stay connected with patients in a much more empathic way. Because Rita recognized that the way that medical education was headed and had been going for a while really steered, healthcare providers away from that naturally. So it was kind of an interesting stream to jump into because, of course, my own experience was like, oh, yeah, that's happening to me, even though I'm not a doctor, I'm a social worker. But I know what it's like. And of course, I was witness to that.
Well, so much of our training too, I think, was around, and you and I were, again, in New York City, sort of classically psychoanalytically trained, which emphasizes the distance between you and your, it's the patient, right? And so that we're taught to have that classic blank screen where it's like, you're just kind of there and they project their things and then you try to sort of make sense out of them. But what that precludes you from doing is sometimes establishing that connection, which I think we now know research-wise is one of the main curative aspects of therapy, just in general.
Yeah.
So what you're describing sounds like to me that you make use of these other mediums to help establish that connection with somebody that you're working with. So be it via, I don't know, you listen to music together, or you like make a sort of paint together, or is it?
Yeah. So yeah, no. So I should probably do a deeper dive into that, because I want to be clear that narrative medicine, it's not a therapeutic modality.
Okay.
It's not like narrative therapy, for example, which a lot of people,
Okay.
kind of go, oh, narrative therapy, I know what that is. It's like, no, it's not the New Zealand, originating family treatment. But I just want to do one little kind of back step to what you were just talking about, psychoanalytic training.
Yeah.
So, and since we're talking about burnout and burnout prevention in a lot of ways, is so one thing I did, I don't know if you remember this, but at JWJ, about a year after I started, I also had another, realization, like, I'm way in over my head. I have no idea how to do any of this, and I need help. And so what I did was I got myself into one of the psychoanalytic training institutes in the city, I think maybe just a year after I started. But the place that I went to really was a firm model of a two-person psychology within psychoanalysis, which meant that it really honored the dynamics that are created by who you are as a therapist and who you are as a person, what you bring into the room with your patient, right? So it's not just a one-person psychology, be like, you, Stephen, the analyst, and I'm just going to look at you and experience you from a distance. This is really like, okay, we're co-creating something here, and that's what we work from, right? Everything and the therapeutic function of our dyad comes out of this co-creation between the two of you. Because quite frankly, I'm different with whoever I sit with, right? Which makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
It makes sense when you say it, but it's kind of like,
you're right.
Anyway, so I mean, that's maybe how backward psychoanalysis is.
Yeah, well, I mean, then there is a difference too between psychoanalysis, which is sort of that classic, Freudian way of looking at things, and also, psychodynamic, which I think is maybe a little bit more of that. Let's look at like what's going on here between the two of us today.
Yes.
And hopefully that will help us help you.
Well, it's interesting because, right. I mean, I think these are subtler points. I mean, the certificate that I got was in psychodynamic psychotherapy, but it was from a psychoanalytic institute, which if I had gone farther and done the 5-year program, which I did apply for, but I chickened out from going. And I'm actually glad that I didn't do it, but it would have been the same thing. It would have been the same thing. I mean, maybe I would have put someone on the couch for 3 days a week or something like that. But it was the same operating principles, right? So psycho. Maybe my only pushback on your definition of psychoanalysis is that there's many modes of psychoanalysis.
Sure. Yeah. And in general.
I like to think that there's like more interpersonal, because that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about like, Stephen Mitchell, people like that, as being the foundations for the thinking of this kind of psychoanalysis.
Okay. So then help me to understand. So knowing that narrative medicine is not a therapeutic technique per se, what is it exactly? Because I remember when we were talking earlier and you're like, oh, narrative medicine. And I was like, what the heck is that? I have no idea.
Right. The joke in narrative medicine, first of all, you always know you're in bad shape when one cannot answer you directly about what narrative medicine is. But it's actually that's kind of an inside joke, in the program, is that everyone has a different elevator pitch for it, right? Like no one really knows how to quite answer what you just asked, which is kind of funny.
I've presented the most profound question in narrative medicine already.
And in fact, before I came on to talk with you, I was like, I better look this up to see what it is. Like, what does it say on the website? What does it say on the website? And actually what it says on the website, is something like, it's a practice for people in healthcare, right? And those can be anyone, any kind of provider, right? So from doctors to, people like me, to really, to bring out patients' voices and bring out caregiver voices in a way that gets submerged a lot by what healthcare is, right? So it's interesting because in a way it's analogous to what we were talking about at the very beginning. it's opening up those channels and those opportunities for greater depth in connecting and understanding patients, right? So what does that look like? So narrative medicine is really based around a workshop model. And the workshop is for the providers, it's not for the patient. Although there have been some things where they kind of blend the two, where they do it together. And just very, very briefly, so a workshop is, and I did this last semester, actually. I was co-facilitating a workshop with another student, first at the fertility clinic at Columbia Presbyterian, Senior Presbyterian, and then we did a wellness program for senior nurses at NYU Langone. And so the workshop model is this. You come in with a plan to present a piece of art. And for us, that meant sometimes it was a poem, sometimes it was a painting. And this is something me and the other facilitator would choose. And we would choose based on how we thought these art pieces might be appropriate for the setting and the group that we were talking to, that we were leading. And then you really just have this part of the time of the workshop is you're looking or reading this particular piece of art, and that's called the close reading, right? So you're really kind of going into what's your response to this piece. Mm-hmm. And of course, partly what's beautiful about that is everybody has a different response, and everybody's response is valid. So you have this group experience of, oh yeah, I noticed that, and oh wow, I didn't notice that, and so you're kind of doing this. It's like Rashomon, right? But you're all in the present with this piece of art.
Different views and angles of the same thing.
And each one is valid, which, by the way, is very helpful in healthcare because, as we all know, one of the major peeves a lot of people have about their relationships with doctors and medical providers is that they're trained as this is it. Right? Kind of a monofocus on this is the truth and blah, blah. So that's the radical listening. Then what happens in the workshop is we've designed a prompt, a writing prompt. And a writing prompt is a phrase, a question that we design what we call in the shadow of the text, right? So it's related to the painting or the poem or the piece of prose that we just presented, but it's a little bit more open-ended. So an example of a prompt would be, like we showed a painting, a very powerful painting by a painter named, what's his last name? Is it Salim Tour? And all these figures at a kitchen table. So one person is standing up. So one prompt was, write about a time you had to stand up.
Okay.
So you can go very personal with it, or you cannot. Or you could talk about someone else who has to stand up. And it's very fast. So 5 minutes, right? Like no more than 5 minutes. And we kind of coach people like, we're not trying to outright each other. We're not trying to be creative writers here. Just do it. Don't think about it, et cetera, et cetera. So, it bypass a lot of the observing ego stuff, although, you have to get through that a little bit. And then the invitation and the next part of the process in the workshop is you all read your pieces and people respond to your pieces. And what that does is that creates a level of engagement, and there's actually a dynamic, and I'm forgetting the word for it now. It's a form of cohesion, right? That kind of
like a collective, kind of experience.
Absolutely. And also in the act of writing, you've had to commit your response to the prompt, right? So you've kind of had to choose and put it into language, right? Which is a very powerful thing when you're in a group. And so in the space of an hour or an hour and a half, people have these very, very profound experiences, not so much of bearing their souls, although that's part of it, but I think really of a shared vulnerability, of a shared humanity, because you're all responding to something together. It's also the act of focusing on the text, right? This isn't about going, I. It's about let's talk about what the text is doing and how it goes about accomplishing it. And by having this kind of third party in the room, it's a safer place to operate, right?
The third party being like the text or the whatever it is that you're looking at.
Exactly.
Okay.
So like a common move for me as a facilitator is, because look, this is not therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is not, we're trying to get your trauma out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in, so Steve, tell me about, you talked about the tree that you have, the tree painting behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about how you said that it's joyous. Tell me a little bit more about what in the painting exactly made you the joyous, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're really fine tuning people's noticing skills.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, also with the other things I just described, you're also kind of reinforcing people's ability to collaborate with each other, because you're doing something, you're sharing this intimate activity with people. As I think, if you're working with people, it's always a very different feeling when you know a little bit more about the person that you're working with than someone you don't. And so it usually kind of really increases just collaboration and respect for the people you work with. Huh. And it allows you to bring all of this to your patient. So, or your client or your consumer, whatever you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it's like a twofold thing of, on the one hand, you get all of these different perspectives that are happening, and you sort of gain respect for, or at least acknowledgement of, the way that other people are looking at things. And then at the same time, you also are creating, as you said, this collective sense of cohesion, so that while we're all different and we may look at these things in different ways, we're also all connected at the same time. What do you feel about that? This might be hard to answer, but what do you feel about that experience is curative towards those feelings of alienation, of being burned out?
Yeah.
What would you point towards that you felt like was really helpful for you with that?
That's a great question. And it's partly a great question because I was talking with the creator of the program recently, and she said, I was kind of like, how can I be useful here? And she was like, as a therapist, you can help us really help quantify what are the therapeutic elements within what we do
here. Yeah.
So that way we can explain it to, because she goes around to, psychoanalytic institutes and talks about narrative medicine, right? So it's a really interesting thing. I think I'm going to harken back to, this comes out of my art history, kind of training, but the word sublime. And I'm thinking of sublime in the sense of the, it used to be used, especially around in England and in the 1800s. John Ruskin used to write about it, especially because he was a big champion of James W. Turner, the great landscape painter. But there was a whole movement of the sublime around both the beauty and the horror of nature. And I think there is kind of a human correlate to that embedded in narrative medicine, that when you're looking at art together, and we're talking art that really inspires, right? Although I think depending on who you ask, they might say, you can find art in SpongeBob, and maybe, right. God bless them, maybe that's true. But, you're usually looking at things that have a level of just real depth to them, whether it's a visual piece or a prose or a poem piece. And I think connecting to that, right? Experiencing that as a group, it's a little like being in a movie theater, right? I mean, isn't that the part of the power of movies, right? Like we're all sitting there in the dark, but this is kind of the more active version, I think. And I think that's part of it, is just being able to tap into something that's very human, but you're also doing it as a collective experience. And I think the writing part also, what it does is it evens the playing field, because sure, someone may write better than me within a group. In fact, there always is someone who's writing better than me, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that your voice, you took steps at getting your voice heard. And Lord knows, we know that's the whole thing in doing therapy, is really paying attention to someone's voice. And can you really hear it?
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of when I first started even considering going back to school for becoming a therapist. One of the big influences for me was Carl Jung and the idea of the collective unconscious, and the fact that you could be, an African bushman, or you could be in downtown London or something, and that there were these things that binded us all together, symbols even within dreams and buried kind of deep in people's unconscious.
Yes.
And there's so much power in that connection.
Yes.
And I think that ultimately, that's probably where a lot of that curative factor comes into play, is that the antidote for that alienation is to go back to that sense of connection between, be it you and those people in the room, or even just really, the human race in general.
Yes.
Obviously, something we hear a lot about these days is sort of connection and lack of connection, and how do we foster that, et cetera.
Yeah. Because I realized I remembered the word and the concept that I was struggling to relate specifically to what you're talking about now. It's enchantment.
Yeah.
The word is enchantment. To feel such a level of connection with your fellow man, woman, whatever, that it's a form of enchantment. And that's a really powerful thing, there's something, even though I don't hear the word soul used a lot in narrative medicine, I think it's applicable, right? Because it's different when you start using words like that, enchantment, soul. That's a very different level of engagement with yourself and with patients.
So if somebody is either struggling with that sense of feeling disconnected, feeling burnt out, whether you're a clinician trying to reach your clients, patients, whatever, or you're a parent and you're feeling disconnected from your kids, or maybe it's, you're feeling disconnected from your spouse, or whatever sort of the relationship is that you're trying to navigate in your life. Do you have any, I don't know if I want to call them tips, but I guess I'm going to do that for lack of a better word. But like, what are things that you notice when you feel like that's starting to happen, if it's not sort of readily apparent to you already? And B, is there anything you would generally suggest people do to try and reconnect with that sense of being enchanted or being fundamentally connected? Right.
Sense of wonder in a way. Well, those are right. Those are two very different questions. And I guess the first question is really, how do you notice? And of course, that kind of points to if you have any practice of self-awareness. And I guess for me, maybe that's the best way I can answer the question, is just, and this happens every day, right? Is just catching yourself. What's the chatter? What's the tone of the internal dialogue today, right? And I think we all probably have some idea of when we're being kind to ourselves and when we're not. And when we're not being kind to ourselves, and maybe that's constant, right? Maybe that's the constant thing. Guess what? No matter how kind you are to the people around you, eventually that will leak out. It just will. It just does, right? We're both married, so I think we can safely say we are intimately familiar with this dynamic.
Yes, you can say that. Yeah. Well, and some you probably also get. I was thinking this as I was asking my long-winded question. I think you get some sense, even if you're not necessarily, and we all obviously fall victim to this, attuned to what's going on for you internally. someone in your life will let you know
That's right.
that these things are coming out.
That's right.
So paying attention to that and paying attention to yourself and that internal dialogue.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also the father of a 14-year-old girl. So if I took every statement or every response from her as a sign of my internal dialogue, I would be pushing up daisies, because guess what? A 14-year-old girl thinks anything I say or do is complete caca, I mean, completely. So you do sometimes have to take things with a grain of salt.
Right. You have to filter a little bit where that's coming from on some level.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So once you're able to see that, have some recognition of that, like, and I think having some sense of, look, I mean, there's transitory stuff, you're stuck in a traffic jam, and sure, the best mood, and that can get from that. But then there's stuff that just never lifts. It's like a Linus cloud that just follows you everywhere, like in Snoopy. And then in terms of what you can do, it's funny because I mean, if I'm on my game and I'm really taking care of myself, I guess I go one of two ways, and maybe they're the same thing. But one is I think generosity of spirit. And it's interesting because if I can kind of clamp on to that, even if I'm being generous to someone else and I'm not feeling it, the act itself will eventually force me to kind of catch up to the mood I want to be in, right? What they do in AA, even if you don't feel like being sober, by acting sober, you will eventually feel sober. It's like being of service and like fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So sometimes it's just like forcing myself to be like, what can I do just to kind of get myself out of my own head and just give to someone? And that could be anyone from my wife to one of my neighbors, to someone I'm normally not charitable to in my own mind, like that kind of thing. And of course, I think just really pampering myself. And, pampering for me might mean just taking a wine course, online or, or
so decadent.
Exactly. Or, saying, you know what, I'm just going to take a break and watch the Mets tonight, and, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's like a combination of being of service and generous to others, and also giving some of that to yourself at the same time, whatever that looks like. For you.
It might not be at the same time. I mean, sometimes they're like two disparate things, right? I try to keep up with certain practices in my life, try to keep up with meditation. I try to keep up with physical exercise. I think for me, physical exercise is huge. And especially as I get older, because I'm just creakier in general. And thank God.
That's why you look so good now, though.
It's true. We really haven't aged. I mean, you got some gray. It's amazing. I have less hair. I don't know if you know.
What? Gray? Where? I completely agree. I mean, those two things are also really big for me as well. So, I completely agree.
I'm a big fan of, I like to cook. And so a good example of being generous and also pampering myself is baking some cookies, some healthy cookies for my daughter. Just as a funny aside, I mean, I don't know about you, but during COVID, I will joke that I became kind of like the Amazon delivery guy in my own house, because, our daughter was at home online all the time for school. So I would make her food. I would bring it up to her, put it outside her door, take a photograph of it, send it to her, and then kind of, run away, So I have like the whole year of COVID is just like mostly food pictures of like outside my daughter's door.
All the texts from dad are just pictures of food.
Exactly. Yeah.
That strikes me as actually being a really smart technique in many ways. You give what you have to give, but then again, you don't necessarily have to get what might be coming back at you in whatever 14-year-old.
Absolutely. Well, especially with a 14-year-old, because, with a 14-year-old, it's like The Exorcist, it's like you don't go in there alone. Yes. You go in there with like, a chaplain or a priest or something, like, otherwise it's the revolving head and the vomit and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well,
that's less about being charitable than about just self-preservation,
Right. Yes. It also pays to be smart and know what situation you're getting yourself into.
You have to be strategic. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Well, I think we got to wind this down
Yeah.
here. But speaking of being generous, I certainly appreciate you sort of donating your time and thoughts and, dare I say, wisdom on this subject to everyone that's listening. I think there's a lot to take away from this. And it's a great reminder just to, it sounds like a cheesy after school special, but, be nice to other people and be nice to yourself.
Yeah.
And ultimately you feel better.
Yeah. Or maybe my tweak to that would be being generous, because you don't have to necessarily be nice per se, but being generous can take a different form.
Just giving.
Yeah. Just, and it can be very small. Be very small about it. You don't have to be Gates or Warren Buffett to be generous.
Right.
So, and we all have something to give.
It makes a lot of sense.
So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for giving me the chance to talk without being interrupted, because Lord knows I'm not used to that.
It's a new experience.
So your generosity is acknowledged too. And look, I really do. I encourage you. I definitely check out the narrative medicine. Just Google it up, Columbia. All kinds of people are attracted to it and use it. I've met people from all over the world and from many different disciplines. So it's cool.
All right, that was Peter Sultan. If you want to check out any of that narrative medicine, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I will leave that information in the show notes. Thanks again so much to Peter for on Instagram and lending us his valuable insight. And as goes along with some of the themes in this show, don't be shy. I would love, love, love to hear from you. Well, that's it for today. Until next time, be well and be in touch.
This podcast is not intended as medical or psychological treatment. In no way should it replace treatment from a mental health professional.